In a dusty antique shop, Margaret, Maggie, O'Connor stumbles upon a forgotten bundle of World War II letters, each written by a soldier who never made it home. Driven by the desperate love etched into every page, Maggie embarks on a quest across time, uncovering a broken love story that ignites an unexpected hope in her own life. Through one soldier's lost words, she might just rediscover her own purpose before it's too late. The late afternoon sun over Winfield Harbor cast a golden sheen across the water, reflecting off the aging wooden dock where Margaret, Maggie, O'Connor stood, lost in thought. Salty breeze ruffled her dark hair as she looked past the fishing boats bobbing in the gentle swells. She imagined how different her life might have been if she'd never come back here. If, after her father's funeral, she had simply fled to some city far away from Winfield's hush of memories and regrets. But the truth was that Maggie had nowhere else to go. At 33, she found herself back in her childhood town, living in the same small house where she had grown up, alone now that her mother had moved to a distant cousin's home for more specialized medical care. Her father had passed the previous spring from a heart attack, leaving behind a modest inheritance that was barely enough to cover the funeral costs and some overdue bills. The house was paid off, at least, but it felt empty and stale. Every morning Maggie woke to the same faded wallpaper in the hall, the same old creaking floors, the same silent rooms. It was a far cry from the life she had once dreamed of, traveling the world as a photojournalist, capturing images of places far beyond Winfield's modest harbor and quaint streets. But one rejection after another had chipped away at her ambition. Then her father's sudden passing had brought her career, and her entire life, to a screeching halt. She felt stuck in limbo, working part-time at Fisherman's Way Diner, waiting tables for the same neighbors she'd known since childhood. Most customers were kind, but the slow pace and repetitive routine left her restless. At night she tossed and turned, haunted by the question, is this all there is? Grief gnawed at her. It wasn't just the loss of her father, or even her mother's departure to a distant city for medical care. It was everything else that had unraveled in the last 2 years. She had dropped out of her photography program after running low on funds, had broken off an engagement with a man who turned out to have no interest in supporting her dreams, and now found herself wholly uncertain about her place in the world. One Tuesday evening, after finishing her shift at the diner, Maggie decided to walk home by way of the waterfront. The orange glow of the setting sun was mesmerizing, but even that beauty didn't lift her spirits fully. As she passed the peeling facade of Treasure Time Antiques, her feet slowed. This was the shop her grandmother used to frequent when Maggie was a kid, back when she believed every trinket might hold a secret story. She hadn't set foot inside for years. Impulsively, she stepped in. A bell chimed overhead, releasing a comforting jingle in the cramped space. She was greeted by the familiar must of old paper and worn leather, the kind of layered scent that accumulates around antiques. Shelves crammed with faded books, chipped porcelain figurines, and tarnished candlesticks lined the narrow aisles. An elderly shopkeeper behind the counter, Mr. Portman, if she remembered correctly, peered at her over wire-rimmed glasses. "Help you find something, miss?" he asked in a gentle voice. "I'm not really looking for anything in particular," Maggie replied. "Just browsing." He gave a slow nod. "Take your time?" Wandering among the curiosities, Maggie felt a flicker of nostalgia. As a child, she used to imagine she was an explorer each time she accompanied her grandmother here, rummaging through old postcards and vintage postcards, sometimes rummaging through drawers of random keepsakes. Something about rummaging through the past made her feel like she was connecting with histories beyond her own. Her gaze drifted over a wooden chest perched on a low table. Its surface was scratched, but the brass hinges gleamed as if recently polished. She knelt down and flicked the latch open. A swirl of dust rose in the lamplight, causing her to stifle a sneeze. Inside the trunk lay a jumble of odds and ends, old newspapers, a lonesome glove, a cracked picture frame, and, near the bottom, a bundle of yellowed letters tied with a faded blue ribbon. Maggie's heart gave a tiny jolt. She slid the letters out, noticing the top envelope was addressed in careful handwriting. To Miss Adeline Moore, 46 Pine Avenue. The postmark dated back to 1944. She glanced at the name. Adeline Moore. She couldn't recall any Moores in Winfield, but the address was only a few blocks from her own house. Intrigued, Maggie gently untied the ribbon to reveal half a dozen letters in total, each bearing the same sender's name, Private Daniel Harris, stationed in Europe during World War II. The rest were presumably never mailed, or at least never received by the intended recipient. Why had they ended up in an antique store trunk? Who was Adeline Moore, and what had become of her and the soldier who wrote these letters? The curiosity flickered inside Maggie with surprising intensity. She brought the letters to the counter. Mr. Portman squinted. "Ah, yes. Those came in with an estate sale lot. I don't know the specifics. I'm afraid." They struck a chord in Maggie she couldn't name. Perhaps it was the swirl of unfulfilled promise, or the romance implied by a soldier's penned thoughts to someone he dearly missed. She wanted to read them, to see how that story ended. Or if it ended, maybe she was simply longing for a window into someone else's life, a distraction from her own swirling discontent. She cleared her throat. "I'll take them." He raised an eyebrow. "All right. That'll be $15. Maggie paid, tucking the letters carefully into her purse. She left the store and continued home under the deepening twilight. That night, she made a simple dinner, but her hands shook with anticipation for what was waiting in her bag. In her bedroom, she sat cross-legged on the bed, the bedside lamp casting a soft circle of light. Heart fluttering, she untied the ribbon and began to read. "Dear Addie," the first letter began, "we're due to ship out tomorrow. I can't say where exactly, but I promise to write whenever I can. I miss the harbor air, and I miss you most of all." The letter continued with descriptions of training camp, the weather, and Daniel Harris's quiet hopes to come home soon. He mentioned how he and Addie had danced at the harvest ball in Winfield last autumn, how he longed for her laugh. Maggie's eyes misted as she read. She couldn't help but picture a young man, hardly older than 19 or 20, putting pen to paper while bombs thundered in the distance. It stirred something inside her, longing, heartbreak, but also a faint light of courage. She moved on to the second letter. It spoke of a fierce battle somewhere in France, how Daniel lost a close friend, how the reality of war had begun to shake him. And yet, throughout, he wrote to Addie with undiminished affection. The letter ended with, "Even in the thick of it, I remember your smile, and it keeps me going. Tell me you'll wait for me, Addie. I need to know there's still something good in this world." By the time Maggie finished reading the 6 letters, tears streaked her cheeks. Each one revealed a deepening bond between Daniel and Addie, even though it sounded like a romance overshadowed by war. The last letter, dated November 1944, ended abruptly. "I hope this letter reaches you. They're calling me out. If you can see it in your heart, marry me when I'm back. I need you to say yes." There was no mention of whether Addie answered. No clue as to whether Daniel survived the war or if he ever made it home. These letters, never delivered, remained suspended in time, a testament to an uncertain love story. Maggie found herself lying awake that night, thinking about the letters and about her own aimlessness. She pictured that 19-year-old soldier, filled with hope amid such darkness. It made her own troubles feel both petty and yet no less real. Perhaps, she reasoned, she could deliver these letters to some descendant of Adeline Moore or Daniel Harris. But she had no starting point beyond the old address. Did 46 Pine Avenue even exist anymore? The next morning, Maggie slipped out early, determined to walk to Pine Avenue and see. After meandering through the quiet streets, she found the house in question, a small single-story bungalow with a chipped picket fence, a rusted mailbox read Lopez, indicating new owners. Still, Maggie summoned the courage to knock. A middle-aged woman answered, looking polite yet puzzled. Maggie cleared her throat, trying to sound confident. "Excuse me, I'm sorry to bother you. I live nearby and I found some old letters addressed here, from 1944, written by a soldier named Daniel Harris to a Miss Adeline Moore." The woman frowned and shook her head. "We bought this place 10 years ago. I've never heard of Adeline Moore. The old owners were the Parkers. They'd been here for decades, I think. Sorry." Maggie thanked her and left, puzzling over her next step. She could try the local historical society, or maybe the county records. It became a small quest, a way to break the monotony of her diner shifts. Whenever she had free time, she scoured old newspapers in the public library. Days turned into weeks, and she found small tidbits, a mention of Miss Adeline Moore in a local newspaper from 1942, referencing a scholarship to attend a teacher's college. Another snippet from 1945 briefly listed a local man named Daniel Harris among the missing in action. Her heart sank at that possibility, but there was no conclusive mention of Adeline's fate nor Daniel's. Maggie grew more deeply invested, as if solving this mystery would somehow fix the emptiness in her own life. She kept reading and rereading the letters, gleaning personal details, trying to cross-reference them with genealogical archives. One Friday after her morning shift, Maggie was hunched over a microfilm reader at the library. She scrolled through an old August 1945 edition of the Winfield Herald. Her eyes suddenly caught a small notice near the bottom of page 7. "In loving memory of Private Daniel Harris, 1925-1945, fallen in the line of duty." Her throat constricted so Daniel hadn't made it home. She read the short obituary twice. It mentioned that he died from injuries sustained in the Battle of the Bulge, that he was the only son of Mr. and Mrs. Samuel Harris. No mention of Adeline, no mention of an engagement. But now she at least knew Daniel's fate. Fighting a swell of emotion, Maggie jotted down the location of his burial site. He was laid to rest in a veterans' cemetery about an hour's drive away. On a whim, she made plans to go there the next day. She wanted to see Daniel's grave, if only to honor the memory of a man who had yearned so much for a future he never got to live. That Saturday was a crisp autumn day, the air tinged with the scent of falling leaves. She borrowed her neighbor's car and drove north, following winding roads that led to a quiet field of headstones. Her heart pounded as she meandered between rows scanning names. Finally, she found a modest stone marker: Daniel Harris, Private, U.S. Army, 1925-1945. Beloved son. Maggie felt tears prick her eyes. She knelt, gently placing a small bouquet of daisies she had brought. "I'm sorry you never got to come home," she whispered. "I'm sorry Addie never got these letters, Daniel." Her voice trembled with the swirl of her own unspoken regrets. How could a life end so abruptly and so young, with so many dreams left unfinished? She traced the letters in his name. For the first time in a while she felt truly present, aware of her own fragility. A hush fell over the cemetery, broken only by distant birdsong. Then she heard footsteps. Maggie turned to see an older man in a neat gray coat approaching with a single rose in his hand. His hair was white, but he walked with measured strength. He paused, noticing her standing by Daniel's grave. "Afternoon," he said softly. "Were you family?" Maggie shook her head. "No, sir, I'm not. I found Daniel's letters in an antique store, the ones he wrote to a girl named Adeline Moore. I came to pay my respects." A gentle sadness flickered in the man's eyes. He drew closer, placing the rose by the headstone. "You know about Addie, then?" Her eyes widened. "You knew her?" He nodded, exhaling. "Addie Moore was my aunt." A spark of electricity shot through Maggie's spine. "Oh my goodness. I've been searching for someone who might know her. Did she ever?" He offered a small, wistful smile. "My name's James Whitmore. I'm retired Navy, but I come out here every month to pay respects to soldiers, especially Daniel. Aunt Addie used to speak of him sometimes." Maggie's pulse hammered. "She did? Then she got his letters." James shook his head slowly. "No, not the last ones. She received a few early on, but I think some got lost in transit. Wartime mail was unpredictable. And well, once Daniel was listed missing in action, she never heard from him again. She waited and waited, but the official news eventually broke her heart." A solemn hush fell between them. Maggie's gaze dropped to the letters in her purse. "I have them with me," she said quietly. "These are from late 1944. I'm sorry if it pains you, but I didn't know if you'd want them." James nodded, tears brightening in his eyes. "I would, yes. Thank you." They moved to a small bench beneath a willow tree on the cemetery's edge. With trembling hands, Maggie handed over the bundle. James untied the ribbon and began reading. Maggie watched as his expression shifted from curiosity to deep sorrow, then gentle admiration. She found herself holding her breath, worried these letters might be too painful. But when James finished, tears shimmered in his eyes, and he exhaled shakily. "I never knew Daniel personally, but Aunt Addie spoke of him as the great love of her life, the man she was sure she'd marry. She never did marry anyone else. She passed away in the 1990s. I wish she could have read these." Maggie's own eyes brimmed with tears. "Me too. It's heartbreaking to think she never knew how much he loved her." For a long moment, they sat in respectful silence, the autumn leaves whispering overhead. Then James turned to her. "Would you like to hear the rest of the story?" Aunt Addie eventually became a schoolteacher in Ohio. She poured her life into her students, but she always wore this locket with Daniel's picture. She never forgot him. Maggie swallowed the lump in her throat. "So that's why no one in Winfield seemed to know her." "Yes," James replied softly. "She left Winfield after the war, hoping to escape the grief. My mother was her sister, so I grew up hearing fragments of her story. I only pieced together the details as I got older." Maggie nodded. "I'm relieved these letters are finally in someone's hands who cares." He studied her face, a gentle kindness in his gaze. "Thank you, Miss O'Connor." "Maggie O'Connor? Well, Maggie, I don't suppose you know how much this means to me," James said, voice quivering. "Aunt Addie is gone, but reading these letters, it feels like giving her a piece of Daniel back. Sometimes the smallest gestures can mend a broken story." Maggie pressed her lips together, tears slipping free. She realized in that moment how the letters, too, were mending something in her. For weeks, she had poured her time into searching for Adeline Moore's story. In that process, she had found a sense of purpose, however small, that had been missing. They ended up spending another hour walking slowly among the graves as James recounted more family history. He told her how Aunt Addie had traveled once to Europe in the 1960s, visiting war memorials, always hoping to find closure for Daniel. He explained how she lived the rest of her days in quiet devotion to helping children read. Maybe in some small way, he concluded, she carried on Daniel's hopes for a better world through her teaching. By the time they parted, the sun hung low, casting long shadows across the cemetery. James took her hands in his, holding them gently. "Maggie, I feel like I owe you a debt. But I suspect you didn't do this for money or anything like that. Perhaps you needed to find something too." She gave a shy, watery smile. "Yes, I did, and maybe I still do. But meeting you, learning their story, it's helped me remember that life can't be put on hold. I've been stuck, and seeing how quickly Daniel's life was cut short, it made me realize I can't keep waiting for tomorrow to start living." James nodded. "We only get one chance at life, you know. Don't let it slip away." They shared a farewell hug. Maggie left feeling a swirl of emotions. She couldn't help but think about how she had unexpectedly carried out one final task for Daniel Harris, delivering his heartfelt words to at least one member of the woman he loved. In the weeks that followed, Maggie felt a subtle shift in her routine. She no longer dreaded her morning shifts at the diner quite as much. She discovered a renewed sense of gratitude, even in small tasks like refilling coffee cups or wiping down tables. She found herself chatting with the regulars more genuinely, learning their stories instead of drifting through her days on autopilot. Yet, a part of her still felt incomplete. Occasionally, she'd take out her camera, the same aging DSLR she had used in college, and snap pictures around Winfield Harbor, fishermen mending nets, seagulls perched on pilings, the soft pink hues of dawn over the water. Each click of the shutter reminded her of who she had once wanted to be. "Why did I stop?" she whispered to herself one evening, scrolling through the images on her camera's screen. She knew the answer too well. Fear. Fear of rejection. Fear of not being good enough. Fear of living a life that demanded more courage than she possessed. One crisp morning, an envelope arrived at her doorstep with no return address. Curious, she tore it open and discovered a single handwritten note. "Dear Maggie, I hope you're doing well. I wanted to send you a small token of gratitude for returning Daniel's letters. It isn't much, but I believe you'll appreciate it. I found something in Aunt Addie's old trunk, a photograph of Daniel and Addie together at the Harvest Ball in 1943. I'm passing it on to you. Perhaps it will remind you that every life is a story worth telling, whether in pictures or in words. Warmly, James Whitmore." Enclosed was a black and white photograph capturing a young woman with soft curls dancing with a smiling young soldier in uniform. The corners were dog-eared, the background a blur of a crowded hall. Maggie's heart constricted at how young and full of hope they looked. It felt like she was peering through a portal to a moment untouched by heartbreak or war. She pinned the photo on her bedroom wall, next to some of her own snapshots. Each morning, she glanced at it for a spark of motivation, a reminder that life could change in an instant. If she had any dreams left, perhaps it was time to chase them. But as November gave way to early winter's chill, new challenges rolled in. Her mother's health took a sudden downturn. Maggie spent nights on the phone with the distant cousin who provided updates on their mother's weakening condition. Money was tight, the medical bills escalating. She considered traveling there to help, but the cousin insisted it was best for her mother to remain in the specialized care facility. Still, the weight of potential loss pressed on Maggie's heart. She trudged through her days carrying an invisible burden. At times, she resented the diner's shifts more than ever. She scolded herself for daydreaming about photography when she was on the brink of another family crisis. "You're almost out of money," she thought bitterly. "Who are you to chase silly dreams?" One gray, drizzly afternoon, Maggie slouched in a booth at the diner after closing, exhausted from a double shift. She couldn't stop replaying the doctor's latest call, the mention of complications. She was losing hope that she could do anything to save her mother, or herself. She felt small, helpless, and above all alone. Diner owner Tammy, a kind woman in her 50s with a salt and pepper bun, sat down across from her. "Maggie, honey, you look rough." Maggie let out a weak laugh. "Thanks, Tam. I feel worse. What's on your mind?" Maggie took a breath, her eyes drifting to a corner where photos of past employees hung, smiling faces pinned to a corkboard. "Everything. My mom's sick, the bills are piling up, and I'm still here serving eggs and coffee. Part of me wants to run away, just chase something. But that feels irresponsible." Tammy patted Maggie's hand. "It's not irresponsible to want a life that fulfills you. I've watched you with that camera. You light up when you talk about your photos. But it's not practical." Maggie mumbled. "What's practical? Working yourself to the bone in a place you don't love, or ignoring your talent until it's too late." Maggie swallowed hard, blinking back tears. "I guess we only get one life." She found herself echoing James's words. "Don't let it slip away." Tammy gave a decisive nod. "Exactly. If you want my advice, go after whatever sparks that light in you. Whether that means you stay in Winfield or venture off, you deserve the chance." As Maggie walked home that evening, her mind circled around that conversation. She still wasn't sure how she could leave or pursue any creative ambition when her mother's health was so precarious. Yet she was also terrified of looking back at her life with regret. The letters from Daniel to Adeline had burned a lesson into her heart. Tomorrow isn't promised. Her turmoil peaked that weekend when she received a sobering call from her mother's facility. The doctors were concerned about her mother's weakening heart. They recommended that Maggie come soon if she wanted to spend time with her. That night, Maggie felt every nerve in her body tremble. She tossed in bed, the photograph of Daniel and Addie catching her eye. They were dancing in a single moment of joy, never imagining the heartbreak that awaited them. If I keep waiting, I might lose my chance too, she thought, tears sliding down her cheeks. She decided right then she would take the risk, see her mother, take her camera, and figure out how to weave a new path for herself, one that honored the fragility of life rather than cowering from it. In that resolve, she found a flicker of peace. Within days, Maggie arranged a leave of absence from the diner, uncertain of how long she'd be gone. Tammy gave her a supportive hug, pressing a small wad of cash into her hand. "A little something to help," Tammy said. "I believe in you, Maggie." She packed a few belongings and her camera gear into a duffel, locked up her father's house, and set off for the train station at dawn. Winfield didn't have a large station, just a modest platform for the commuter line. As she waited, her breath visible in the chilly morning air, she thought again of Daniel Harris. He boarded trains for war-torn Europe. "I'm just traveling a few states away, but it feels monumental." After a bumpy, hours-long journey, she stepped into the bustle of a city station, connecting to a local bus that wound its way through suburban streets until she reached the care facility. Anxiety roiled in her gut. She found her mother's room, took a shaky breath and knocked softly. When she entered, a wave of guilt and sorrow overwhelmed her. Her mother, once tall and vibrant, looked frail, propped on pillows, her cheeks hollow. But upon seeing Maggie, her mother's eyes lit up. "Mags," she rasped, a faint smile tilting her lips. Maggie hurried over, clasping her mother's hand. "Hi, Mom. I'm here." They spent the rest of the day talking in low voices, sipping tea together, reminiscing about old Winfield stories. At one point, Maggie hesitantly shared that she'd found a soldier's letters from World War II, and how that discovery had pushed her to reevaluate her life. Her mother listened intently, eyes bright with interest despite her fatigue. "I'm glad you found something that inspires you," her mother whispered. "Don't ever be afraid to follow that spark. I couldn't keep your father from overworking, but you still have time to find your calling, Maggie." Her mother dozed off, and Maggie settled into a chair by the window. The day's warmth began to fade as dusk set in, painting the sky in mauves and blues. Watching her mother's shallow breathing, Maggie felt an ache of realization. Her mother might not have many tomorrows left. But at least she was here now, offering comfort. Days passed in a blur of hospital corridors, hushed voices, and short, gentle conversations with her mother. Maggie used her camera for the first time in months, capturing small details around the care facility's garden. The withered rosebush, a patch of daisies braving the cold, the sun reflecting off a bird bath. She found solace in the lens, the act of framing a scene, preserving a fleeting moment of beauty in a place overshadowed by illness. In quiet moments, Maggie's mother insisted on hearing more about the letters, about the story of Daniel and Adeline. She listened with rapt attention, occasionally smiling, occasionally wiping a tear. "You see, Mags, you do have a gift for storytelling," she'd say softly. "Let your camera and your words bring hope to others. Life's too short not to share what's in your heart." Maggie recorded those words like an oath. As her mother's condition worsened, Maggie wondered if she should stay indefinitely. Yet she also wrestled with a longing to do something more. To use her camera, to honor her mother's faith in her. She took small jobs photographing for local families in the town near the care facility, scraping together money while staying close. One evening, her mother's doctor pulled her aside, explaining that while her mother was stable for the moment, there was no certainty of how much longer. Maggie left the conversation with a hollow feeling. She found a bench in the facility's courtyard and sobbed into her hands, thoughts swirling. "I can't leave her, but how do I hold on to my own dreams?" The conflict felt unbearable. That night, she slept in a chair by her mother's bed, drifting in and out of restless dreams. Near dawn, Maggie felt her mother's frail hand on her arm. "Mags," her mother whispered, "you need to live. Don't watch over me until you've lost everything. I love you. But I don't want to hold you back." Tears streamed down Maggie's cheeks. "I don't want to abandon you. Darling, you aren't. You'll come back to me when you can. But you can't give up on yourself. Think of that soldier who didn't have a choice, whose time was cut short. You do have a choice. Don't waste it." She took those words to heart. The next day, as her mother rested, Maggie began searching for photography workshops, small gigs she could manage while still visiting. A local newspaper had a part-time photography assistant position open. Nerves prickled. I'm rusty out of practice. But she applied anyway. A week later, she got the call they wanted her to come in for a trial assignment. She felt both elation and guilt. Could she really juggle her mother's precarious situation and a new job? But her mother insisted. "I'm not going anywhere right this moment," she said with a shaky laugh. "Go. Take that camera and remember who you are." In early December, Maggie found herself on assignment, capturing photos of a local holiday festival for the newspaper. She wove through booths of homemade crafts and swirling lights, her camera clicking. The crisp night air filled her lungs with something akin to freedom, a promise that she was at last moving forward. After the event, she rushed to her mother's side, excited to show her the pictures. Her mother was weaker, barely able to keep her eyes open, but she smiled at the images. "They're beautiful," she whispered. "So beautiful." In the hallway, Maggie happened upon a letter in her mailbox at the care facility's front desk. The handwriting was familiar James Whitmore. She tore it open. "Dear Maggie, thank you again for bringing Daniel's letters to me. I wanted you to know that I've spoken to a local museum in Winfield that's hosting a small exhibit on personal stories from World War II. They're interested in displaying Daniel's letters and his photograph. I've credited you with finding them, of course. I recall you saying you once studied photography. Perhaps you'd like to photograph some of the exhibit pieces or share your own images related to Winfield's history. It might be a fitting tribute to Daniel and to others who never made it home. In the meantime, I hope you're well and that you've found what you were seeking. Don't let your dreams gather dust, Maggie. Life's too short." With gratitude, James, a lump formed in Maggie's throat as she reread his words. She glanced toward her mother's door, heart twisting with longing to share this new development. For so long, Maggie had believed her path had withered away, that she was doomed to an aimless existence. But the letters she found in that dusty antique store trunk had sparked something. They had led her to connections she never anticipated and showed her the fragile wonder of second chances, even if only to pass on one soldier's love story to a living relative. She carefully folded James's letter and stepped into her mother's room, noticing how peaceful she looked despite the constant hum of medical monitors. Gently, Maggie kissed her mother's forehead, whispering, "Mom, there's so much I want to tell you." Her mother roused slightly, eyes fluttering open. Maggie hesitated. "I got a letter from James. He's helping preserve Daniel's letters. They'll be displayed in a museum exhibit. It's a way for Daniel's words to finally be seen, for Addie's memory to live on. I think it's a reminder to all of us that we can't let regrets overshadow the future." Her mother's lips curved into a faint smile. "That's wonderful, Mags." The next morning, Maggie discovered her mother had passed quietly in her sleep, slipping away in the hush before dawn. The nurse found Maggie hunched in tears by the bedside, clutching her mother's hand, pressing her forehead against it as heartbreak racked her body. She didn't know how long she stayed there, suspended in that private agony. At some point, a nurse gently pulled her aside, offering condolences and practical guidance. Maggie felt numb, but also strangely calm, like a storm had broken inside her. Grief was inevitable, but she also felt a small sense of peace. Her mother had urged her to live, to keep chasing her dreams, and Maggie intended to honor that. After the funeral arrangements were concluded, Maggie decided to return to Winfield Harbor one last time. She had to gather her father's house belongings and figure out if she'd keep it or sell it. Before leaving the city, she mailed her new photography portfolio to the local newspaper. They had been impressed with her festival shots, offering to let her submit more pieces as a freelance contributor. Her heart quickened at the thought of possibility. When she stepped off the train in Windfield, the harbor smelled of brine and wood smoke. The cold wind bit at her cheeks. She walked the familiar streets, feeling both the weight of her father's absence and the memory of her mother's gentle voice urging her forward. She spent the next days packing boxes, sorting old family photographs, sifting through her father's well-worn fishing gear. Pain mixed with nostalgia. On a whim, she pulled out her camera to document these pieces of her life. The worn recliner by the fireplace, the seashell collection on the windowsill, the dusty record player in the living room. Each photo was an homage to a memory, an echo of her parents' presence. A week later, she received a call from the newspaper. They wanted her to come on board part-time, capturing local features around Windfield. She also had an open invitation from James Whitmore to photograph the WWI exhibit that would feature Daniel's letters. Maggie felt her pulse race. She realized that, for the first time in a long while, she had options, genuine, exciting choices. That evening, she grabbed her jacket and walked down to the antique store where she had first found Daniel's letters. Mr. Portman recognized her and smiled. "Hello again. Haven't seen you for a while." She replied, scanning the shelves. "I just wanted to see if you had anything else from that estate lot where I found those letters." He rummaged behind the counter, eventually pulling out a small box of odds and ends. "It's mostly junk, but you're welcome to look." She sifted through, discovering some old postcards, a broken watch, a tarnished belt buckle, nothing nearly as dramatic as Daniel's bundle. But she felt her heart swell with gratitude for the random stroke of fate that had led her here weeks ago. Those letters changed her life in ways she never anticipated. After stepping out of the shop, she strolled down the harbor boardwalk, the moonlit water rippling. In the distance, a buoy bell chimed in the gentle waves. She thought of Daniel and Addie again, two young lovers whose entire future had hinged on a war and a handful of letters. Tragedy kept them apart, but their story had ignited something profound in Maggie's heart. They never got their second chance, she thought, tears blurring her vision. But maybe their story gave me mine. She glanced up at the moon, remembering all the nights she spent feeling lost. Even in the midst of her grief, there was now a sense of direction, an anchor in the knowledge that life was too fragile to live in fear. Her mother's parting words still resonated. "Don't watch over me until you've lost everything. I love you, but I don't want to hold you back." A month later, Maggie officially transitioned to the local newspaper staff as a part-time photographer, splitting her time between Windfield and the city where she had once tended to her mother. She put the family home up for rent instead of selling it, deciding that she might want a place to come back to someday. The day she delivered her first official assignment, a photo spread on Windfield's fishing tradition, she received a letter from James Whitmore again. "Dear Maggie, I can't thank you enough for what you've done. The museum exhibit is opening in 2 weeks. I've secured a small corner featuring Daniel's letters, as well as photographs of him and Aunt Addie. If you'd like, the curator would love some contemporary photos showcasing Windfield Harbor, to tie past and present together. I can't think of anyone better for the job. Hope to see you soon." James. Maggie smiled, tears warming her eyes. She wrote back immediately, accepting. She spent the next days capturing shots around Windfield with fresh eyes, the old boardwalk at dawn, gulls in flight, a solitary fisherman on the pier at dusk. She even took pictures of the antique store's sign, half faded. Each photo, she realized, was part of a larger story, a story of a town and the hidden lives it once held. When the exhibit finally opened, Maggie stood in the museum's modest hall, her heart a flutter of nervous excitement. A small crowd gathered near the glass case displaying Daniel's letters. Next to them hung the black and white portrait of him dancing with Adeline at the Harvest Ball, and a plaque told their tale in succinct detail. Nearby, Maggie's modern photos of Winfield were mounted, the same harbor that Daniel had once longed to see again. James approached, offering her a warm hug. "Look at that," he said quietly, glancing at the case. Daniel's words finally reaching beyond wartime, bridging decades to remind us all of hope and sacrifice. Maggie nodded, eyes shining. "I'm so grateful to have been part of this. It's amazing how one small discovery can change everything." James gestured to her photos. "Your images capture the quiet spirit of Winfield. They belong here. Just like you." She exhaled a soft laugh. "I never thought I'd say it, but I'm actually glad I came back. Even after all the hardships, it feels like I'm seeing Winfield and my life with new eyes." They fell silent, listening to the gentle murmur of visitors reading Daniel's letters. Maggie noticed several people wiping away tears. The raw emotion in those letters was timeless, bridging generational gaps. In the hush of that moment, Maggie felt a peaceful certainty settle in her heart. Her mother might be gone, but Maggie was living in a way her mother would have encouraged, leaning into her calling, honoring the past, and forging something meaningful out of her experiences. When she stepped out into the crisp evening air, James at her side, she looked up at the stars glittering above Winfield Harbor. The faint strains of music from a nearby street performer wafted in the distance, and she remembered Daniel's final words to Adeline, scrawled on paper yellowed by time, "If you can see it in your heart, marry me when I'm back." The vow never had the chance to be fulfilled, but Maggie believed that, somehow through the ripples of time, Daniel's love had left a legacy. It had reached Maggie exactly when she needed it most, reminding her how precarious and precious each day truly was. She let out a breath, feeling the tension of the past few years finally ease. "I'm alive," she reminded herself. "I still have time. I can't let fear stop me anymore." In her mind's eye, she pictured Daniel and Addie dancing across the old wooden floor of that 1943 harvest ball, suspended in a moment of joy. She pictured her mother, watching proudly from the side, encouraging Maggie to go forward. And then she saw herself, camera in hand, stepping away from the sidelines to capture the beauty before her. In that instant, the swirl of memory and aspiration coalesced into a quiet certainty. There would be hardships still, but she was no longer a prisoner of grief or doubt. She had found a reason to take her next breath with intention. And as she walked along the moonlit harbor, the gentle waves lapping at the dock, she clutched her camera to her chest, feeling the pulse of her renewed purpose. The soldier's letter had saved a life after all, Maggie's. By delivering his words, she had discovered her own. And under that endless sprawl of stars, Maggie O'Connor embraced the open horizon of her future, determined to honor every precious moment she had yet to live. In the end, Maggie's discovery of Private Daniel Harris's long, lost letters becomes the catalyst for her own personal awakening, the poignant reminder of life's fragility, and of a love story interrupted by war, compels her to look beyond her grief and fears, and to rekindle her passion for photography. The letters, never read by their intended recipient, find a new purpose in encouraging Maggie to seize her remaining time and live fully. Our lives can be transformed by unexpected encounters or small fragments of history that remind us how precious each moment truly is. By honoring the past and choosing courage over regret, we can shape a future that resonates with love, hope, and purpose.